Right now, Ian Castleberry talking NFL, Gold Nuggets with the Wise Guys, of course, presented by David Creasman and DC Creasman Jewelers. Ian Castleberry, how are you on this warm and muggy Thursday afternoon?
Yeah, trying to stay cool.
Aren't we all? Buddy, good to have you. First things first, your reaction to the NFL today, really laying down the law when it comes to unvaccinated players. And they have basically sent out the memo to teams saying, all right, if a game is postponed because your team was not vaccinated properly and you're the reason due to COVID issues that the game had to be postponed, and if we cannot find a makeup date for that game, you will forfeit that game. But wait, there's more. You will also have to make up the cost. You will have to pay the cost. The money's lost for the other team as well for having that game postponed. So that's going to be a financial hit. And players on that team will not be paid for that week. Wow. We're going to get to Cole Beasley and the Bills here in just a moment regarding kind of a different story. But Ian, what's your first takeaway from this?
Well, the NFL really wants to make sure players get vaccinated, or they don't want any games lost because players aren't getting vaccinated and possibly test positive for COVID-19. Last season was such a nightmare, a logistical nightmare, in terms of games being postponed and rescheduled. You know, we had games on Mondays, on Tuesdays, just so many problems with the NFL did get through it somehow, but it caused so many problems. And when we're coming down to what's now become a personal choice, like, okay, you still have the option of not getting vaccinated. If you really feel like you don't want to do it, go ahead. But it could very much cost you, and that's something that players that you need to take into consideration, deep consideration.
Yeah, and of course, let's not forget, Cole Beasley played for years in Dallas, and we all know how Texas's attitude towards the pandemic has been, pretty casual. On top of that, we'll get with our Bills takeover question in just a little bit here. All right, Ian, as we move on, though, in the NFL, with a couple of days to go before the open of training camp, the Niners signed linebacker Fred Warner to a big extension. And Ian, Warner's been quietly solid for San Francisco. How much money are we talking about here?
Well, Fred Warner is going to be the highest paid inside linebacker in the NFL, this new contract. He signed a 5-year, $95 million extension,
wow.
$19 million a year average. You're right. Inside linebackers don't necessarily get the headlines. They don't always get the sacks. They don't make the interceptions. They're not always covering tight ends and so forth down the field. But they're obviously very important. Somebody who's a sideline-to-sideline inside linebacker can really make the difference for a defense and racking up a bunch of tackles. Fred Warner last season got 125 tackles. 79 of those were solo. 5 tackles for loss. He did get to the quarterback, hitting quarterback 7 times. And he did make some plays. He had 2 interceptions. He had 2 fumble recoveries. So an inside linebacker ideally is always around the ball, and Fred Warner is indeed that kind of linebacker. This deal is a little bit complicated, other than the 5-year, $95 million terms that were announced. But the final 2 years of this contract can be voided by the 49ers. So that would essentially make this a 3-year, $55 million contract. And this mostly has to do with how far Warner's signing bonus can be spread out over 5-6 years, giving the Niners some salary cap room. But after 3 years, if the Niners decide, hey, we don't want Warner to void those 2 years, we want to keep him, we don't want him to be a free agent, the 49ers can buy those final 2 years back, which would essentially be another contract extension, like a 2-year, $39 million extension, to make sure that they keep Warner, who's only 24 years old. So he's very young, despite having a productive career already. By then, the Niners might decide they want to keep him. But so at the very least, Fred Warner is going to be with the 49ers for the next 3 years. All
right. Well, that's actually it's a team-friendly deal, Michael Gordon. I'm sure it goes on all the time. That's kind of the first time I've heard it broken down like that, where it's like, really, the last 2 years, let's see where it goes. If it works out, we'll just call it a contract extension, even though you signed a 5-year deal originally. Man, what they do to do the shell game around the NFL financially. Meanwhile, guys, the Steelers, Ian, are down a linebacker.
Yeah, linebacker Vince Williams told the Steelers that he was going to retire. 31 years old, coming off a pretty productive season, 70 tackles, 47 of those solo tackles, 14 tackles for loss. But the Steelers indicated that they were kind of ready to move on. They initially cut Williams, then they re-signed him for the veterans minimum, which, in real-world money is still outstanding, $660,000. But in the NFL, that's maybe a salary that Vince Williams has decided he's not willing to go through another training camp and put his body through that after 8 seasons. Maybe that's not enough money for him to do that in his mind. But it is a blow to the Steelers, who are already down. They lost Bud Dupree in free agency. Devin Bush is coming back from a serious knee injury, uncertain whether he'll be available at the start of the season. The Steelers apparently feel that they can promote Robert Spillane, who one of their younger reserve linebackers. He had 45 tackles last year. Apparently, they think he's ready to start to move up to a starting position. But right now, you're looking at the Steelers' linebacking core. It could be pretty thin after two big losses, and now they're losing depth as well with Vince Williams retiring.
Oh, man, here we go. And, Roethlisberger, suddenly it seems like Pittsburgh's kind of an old team, Michael. It just seems like that on the outside looking in.
They had a pretty good run here lately in the last few years and stuff, but eventually, though I hear Ben's in great shape. If he's come in, he's come in in great shape and lost some weight, but he's still 39 years old. So the team's gotten old, and I know a lot of people pick against them, but watch out for the Steelers. They're a team that always seems to, when you don't think, when you're about ready to put them out of their misery and stuff, then they come back with 11-5 season. So we'll see. Of course, the big game for them is the opening day in Buffalo when they play the Bills the first game of the year.
Of course. Way to slide that in, Michael. Ian Castleberry in our NFL Gold Nuggets feature, joining us via the DC Creasman Jewelers Wise Lines. Thanks to DC, by the way, for bringing us our NFL weekly Snapchat. And, of course, great to have Ian always with us. All right, guys, Ian, Cowboys owner Jerry Jones got a bit emotional when saying he would do anything for the Cowboys to be in Super Bowl 56. Well, he's sold his soul a few times already. But, Ian, is that because Jerry knows the Cowboys won't be playing in it?
Yeah, I think he does. And, of course, the Cowboys always have big expectations. I think that they're kind of the general pick to win the NFC East, but it's certainly not a certainty. And Jones seems to be at a point in his life or his career, whatever you want to call it, he's 78 years old, where he seems to be looking back now and wondering just how much more time, what the window is for the Cowboys, maybe how much longer he's going to be an active owner. It's difficult to believe he would ever sell the team. But his son is in a position to run the team. But yeah, he says he he'd cut a check if he could to get the Cowboys into a Super Bowl 56. How much would he pay? I guess he's paying, given what the extension was for Dak Prescott. Apparently, he's willing to pay quite a bit. But Jerry Jones also looking back at when he fired Jimmy Johnson and quote, saying, he effed it up. So he seems like a guy who's just kind of looking back now and wondering how much time he and the Cowboys have left as Super Bowl contenders.
And Michael, I mean, let's be honest here, right? I mean, I think we can all agree the Cowboys slide began once Jerry Jones decided I can do this better than Jimmy Johnson or anyone else.
Yeah, being a Bills fan, I wish he had showed up just a couple years earlier there in the 90s.
Right.
But yeah, it's one of the bizarrest things now. Jimmy Johnson was a jerk to Jerry, but it just, that dynasty could have, they won 3 and 4 years, which is pretty remarkable.
And Switzer won with really Jimmy's team.
Yeah, exactly. But they won 3. Even they won with Barry Switzer coaching. That's how good they were. But then things went downhill, and you just think if Jimmy had stayed there, if they just could have gotten along, that team could have won 5 or 6 Super Bowls in a 7-8 year stretch, because you're going to have some bad luck one year or something. So yeah, it's and they just haven't. There's been a good year. I think was it 2015 they went 13, or 2014 or 2015 or 2016 where they went 13-3 and were the number 1 seed before they lost to Green Bay in the playoffs. but they've been, they haven't been horrible. They've been good, but not great. And that's I'm sure that's hard for Big D to put up with. And I'll tell you, once you've won something, a Super Bowl like that, boy, you just want to win another one. And it's been 26 years since they won one. So
I mean, you think about that, 26 years, and then how many times have they made the playoffs in those 26 years? Until recently, it was like maybe one time, maybe in the last 20 years or so. Right
now they've made it more than that because they had Parcells as their coach in the 2000s. They had Bill Parcells, and they won a couple of times, but they just. Remember the one great year they had with Tony Romo with Wade Phillips as their head coach in 2007, and then Tony was dating Jessica Simpson, and Jessica took him to the Bahamas or Mexico.
Cabo. It was Cabo.
Exactly, and then came back and lost to a mediocre Giant team that went on and won the Super Bowl. But that was a really good Dallas team and number one seed, and that would have been a heck of a Super Bowl. Dallas and New England, the Patriots, unbeaten. Boy, if they had played for the Super Bowl, boy, the ratings are incredible anyway. But Dallas
through the roof
and the undefeated Patriots, that would have been incredible. But so they've had some moments, but they just can't sustain them.
Yeah.
And they just don't have that consistency. And you just have to wonder if Jerry is putting his hand in and such and. Has been the reason why, and I think he's starting to realize, maybe I should have just let the football people. Because I heard Brian Billick on the way coming in and being interviewed by Colin, and stuff. Made it great, but he said, Jerry can do what he wants because he is the owner, and at the end of the day, probably you might want to tell Jerry, well, Jerry, you want to coach teams, just coach the team. But he said, you look at the teams that win consistently year after year. The ownership is in the background. Stays out of it, lets the football people do the football thing. My Bills. The Pagulas. They got rid of Rex
Ryan. Won't you guys see? I couldn't even tell the name of your owners.
Exactly. And husband and wife team, but they have full confidence in Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott, and they just let those guys do the job.
I haven't been impressed with Jerry Jones since he unceremoniously got rid of Tom Landry back in the day, a guy that deserved a much better fate. But 3 Super Bowls in 4 years, eventually that settled Cowboys fans down. But then again, Jerry takes over. He wanted to draft Johnny Manziel in 2000. What was that? The 2016 draft. He wanted, and he had to be talked out of it by his personnel people. I think they picked the Frederick kid out of Wisconsin, but a kid that went on to play in Pro Bowls, for crying out loud. And Jerry wanted Manziel because that's Jerry Jones. He's a great marketing guy. He's a tremendous businessman, and he is among the best in that world. What Jerry Jones is a football guy. He's not a personnel guy. He owns a football team, but that's it. But Jerry likes to fancy himself as more because his ego is bigger than the whole damn state of Texas. And, if this is kind of a looking back and going, oops, maybe I should have done it another way. Well, he brought it on himself at that point as Ian Castleberry joins the Wise Guys NFL Gold Nuggets feature presented by DC Creasman Jewelers. All right, it is the Mike Orr Bills takeover question, Ian. So Bills wide receiver Cole Beasley, who will not get vaccinated, did say on Twitter that a Bills player who was vaccinated tested positive for COVID. And this kind of annoyed me because I think Cole Beasley's intent here was to say, yeah, this vaccinated player, he caught COVID. I mean, it's so rare. It happens, but it's rare. But folks like Cole Beasley, that's all they need to say, I'm not getting vaccinated. What does it mean? So the big question here, though, Ian, is what player is basically caught COVID? Because as far as I know, the Bills haven't said anything yet.
Yeah, the Bills haven't announced that, and we could spend a whole segment talking about whether or not you being vaccinated means you can't catch COVID-19 versus whether or not you can still test positive for the virus, but maybe not have as severe symptoms from the virus. But Beasley's been on this jag about getting vaccinated, about COVID-19 during the entire offseason. A couple of weeks ago, I asked Mike if Beasley was on the verge of getting leapfrogged on the depth chart, maybe with fingers crossed, hoping that we don't necessarily have to have a reason to listen to Cole Beasley if he doesn't have a starting spot on the Buffalo Bills. But I have no idea as to who it could be. I mean, it could be a reserve player. Maybe it's someone important, but Beasley trying to use it as justification is annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, they're your people. What do you say?
Yeah, it's annoying. I wish he wouldn't do it. You know, New York State's been hit very, very hard by COVID, so this is kind of a sensitive slot, and the culture is, they built a great culture there. I just hate to see this issue coming up, but we did talk a few weeks ago. But if Cole gets wacky or something like that, that's Isaiah McKenzie, who we talked about a few weeks ago for his great work in Miami. He's done a nice job for the Bills, kind of off the bench as a fifth receiver. If Cole gets wacky if he gets COVID or whatever, I could see Isaiah McKenzie possibly making Cole Beasley a Wally Pip.
Wow, look at that. We'll follow that for sure. Ian, we've got like 60 seconds, but I need to get your thoughts on this. Just a quick baseball note before we let you go and release you to the general population. It looks like Cub Scouts, not the Cub Scouts, but Chicago Cubs scouts are not happy with their return in the Jock Peterson trade with the Braves.
Yeah, apparently the Cubs scouts for the Chicago Cubs think the return for Jock Peterson from the Atlanta Braves was underwhelming. The Cubs got Bryce Ball, a first baseman who he does have good power, but he's a little bit old for the level he plays at. 23 years old, he's at high single A. So I think that the scouts think that Peterson could have gotten more in return, or that maybe the Cubs dealt him too early. But I think those scouts also, there might be a reason that they're not actually running a team versus scouting players, because, Peterson, he's batting .230 when he was traded, 11 home runs, so he does have some power. But he's going to be a free agent after the season. That leaves the Cubs with very little leverage. I think the Cubs got what they could for Jock Peterson. And I don't necessarily think this is some precursor to what else the Cubs might get in return, if they decide. I mean, they could have a major sell-off here. They can trade Chris Bryant. They could trade Craig Kimbrell. They could even trade Anthony Rizzo and Javier Baez. All of those players are going to be free agents after 2021, which is the kind of, the Cubs decided to keep these guys together and make one more run at it. Obviously, that's been a huge mistake. But just because they didn't get a great return for Jock Peterson, I don't think that means that the front office can't still make a good deal for Chris Bryant or Craig Kimbrell.
Gotcha. I know that was a critic. The critics were saying, well, geez, if this is going to be a sign of things to come, this could spell doom for the Cubs if they're going to get that kind of return. But Ian brings up a good point, Mike.
Well, it's 1 week. I mean, trade's been 1 week. Let's give the guy that got traded to the Cubs, let's give him a chance. It's
Mike,
1 week.
That's not how today's world works.
Lord have mercy.
No, man, we need instant gratification right now.
It's not like the Cubs traded Ernie Banks to the Braves. I mean, Peterson's, it's definitely probably a rental, and he's talked about the .230 batting average. He does have some power and stuff, and he's got off to a good start for the Braves, but this is much ado about nothing, in my humble opinion.
Well, we take your humble opinion, and we take Ian's as well. Ian, as always, we appreciate you playing with us, buddy. Have a great rest of the week.
Okay, stay cool, guys.
You too, bud. Be well. One of the best, Ian Castleberry with the Wise Guys. Appreciate him always playing with us. And Ian's appearance talking NFL Gold Nuggets is presented by our friends at DC Creasman Jewelers.